Okay, so I would like to introduce our speaker, Alan Smutylo. And I had, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, maybe 20 years ago, I started to hear the name Alan Smutylo, and there was mostly with art, and paintings and wonderful, uh, you know, a boat sort of paddling at the base of like a big cliff in Greenland or something like that. Wonderful, uh, wonderful views and exciting adventures. But then I was at the Y, the old Y one day, and somebody asked me, "Are you Alan Smutylo?" And I thought, "Oh," and I had never met him. And so if I don't know, it might have been a month later or a few weeks later, a fellow came into the Y, and I thought, ah. Are you Alan Smutylo? So I saw the resemblance. He's bigger and all that, but there's quite a bit of resemblance too. And it turns out we grew up in the same area around Lakeview, east of Port Credit, and we have connections with the Dixie Arena, and stuff like that. So all these little connections in the past. So I became quite aware of his painting in the area. Things were exhibited here and there, and then I started seeing the writing, books, and then lecture series with the Blue Water Lifelong Association for Lifelong Learning here, and I got to attend several of those talks that Alan did here, and it was wonderful to the way he goes out and explores the world and and then documents and depicts what he's seen and discovered in exquisite paintings and exquisite writing. And then we get a chance to share that with him tonight when he does a presentation. And and he's had many awards in both painting and visual arts and also in writing. And he's had many more nominations where he's shortlisted for the awards, but they went to somebody else or whatever. But anyway, but it's all highly recognized for his exquisite professional achievements in both writing and artwork. And as a speaker, he's terrific. So I'm going to welcome Alan Smutylo.
It's nice to know when I get famous, I have a doppelganger around because the crowds could just get too much for me. Thank you, John. Brian, where are you? Thank you. I thought I was going to have to do a tap dance up here for a while. Just a sec. I need this word. Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's a real pleasure to be here and speak with you tonight. That is strong advocates of a natural environment that you guys have dedicated much of your time to. And in a real sense, helping with the sustainability of our planet. I'm going to talk to you about this book that I've written. You can see the cover here. Is that somebody calling? Unlike my other books, this deals with my home ground and your home ground, Georgian Bay. But like my other books, it's really focused on how humans interact with the natural environment. That's interested me really my whole life. Gold of Another Kind, The Lost Legacy of Georgian Bay, it's a combination of historical timeline that I start back at the point of contact, along with a personal narrative of my 55 years of living around various places on Georgian Bay. The gold I'm referring to in the title here is the bay's once abundance of natural resources. That's namely furs, timber, and fish. And I'll deal with those separately, although there was some overlap in terms of the expropriate or the exploitation of those resources. One thing to keep in mind about Georgian Bay, and this was even more significant back in the 16th and 1700s, was the strategic location of Georgian Bay. Even though it had abundance of these resources that I've mentioned, it was in the middle of the Great Lakes. So you could go in any direction from Georgian Bay by water, and it also was fed by some magnificent rivers that flowed into a watershed extended quite a ways north and a little bit to the east. Before I forget, I'm gonna point out a couple things that I'm gonna refer to later in the talk, and if you're able to remember, this might be helpful. Tobermory's here. This is Cove Island. This is Fitzwilliam Island. The top of that is Rattlesnake Harbor. This is Club Island. So I'm just going to be referring to this. I think most of you will know. This is Ste. Marie among the Hurons here. The French River here. Yeah. So the French, this is going to be a little bit like a history lesson from 50 years ago for you guys, but what I'm trying to do is take the sweep of it quite quickly. It's what I tried to do with the book, and look at these three things and this pattern of abuse of the natural world. It's really quite astounding. The French, of course, were the first to create colonies in what would become Canada. Even for the powerful French crown, this was a major expenditure. It was a long way from France and expensive for them to do this. They came mainly with four objectives. One was to create a colony, of course, to grab whatever resources they could find. They wanted to convert the local people to their religion, Christianity, and if possible, to find an inland route to the Orient. They had seen the Spanish and the Portuguese plunder in South America and in Mexico, hauling back gold, becoming very rich in the process. France and England, to some extent as well, were looking to see what North America could provide. And the answer was soft gold or animal fur. For centuries, the native tribes around Georgian Bay had established a pretty sophisticated trading route between them. And when the French arrived, and later the British, and to some extent the Dutch, they fit pretty easily into this trading relationship because they had products that the native people hadn't seen before. They had metal mainly in terms of pots, axes, knives, and guns, and many other things as well. And the European traders also had things that were suitable and were wanted in terms of furs. So this trade relationship seemed to happen pretty easily. It was really a barter system because there was no common currency. Now, at the time, furs were becoming, this is in the 16th century, furs were becoming a fashion statement for the middle class and mainly for the upper class in Europe, and mainly for men's hats. This hat, you've seen them in all kinds of paintings and depictions on movies, these big wide brim hats that men wore, the Three Musketeers, Napoleon, Nelson, all these flamboyant black hats. And these were made from beaver hair. Not the outer hair of the beaver. This is a long, oily hair, but the inner hair, which is coarser, it's barbed at the end, and through quite a complicated process, you can mat it down and make it into any form practically that you want. The complication for the people that were making these hats was using some of the chemicals that they didn't really understand. Mercury was one, and that's where the term Mad Hatter disease came from. I'm gonna forget to push these buttons, so bear with me. No. Of course, it started in the East, this interaction in the trade for furs and European products, and then spread west. As it spread west, they were using the river routes and the birch bark canoe, and to transport the manufactured goods inland and to bring the furs back out. That's where the coureur du bois and the famed voyageurs and what's termed the Voyageur Highway came into effect. So you had already a voracious appetite for furs back in Europe. They had already eliminated all the beavers in Europe at that time. The demand was so great. But fortunately, North America had somewhere between 60 and 200 million beavers, it's estimated. And you had a partnership with parties that wanted each other's product. So what could go wrong? Well, there's quite a list, of course. First of all, prior to contact, around Georgian Bay and Lake Huron, Georgian Bay and Lake Ontario, there already existed a conflict between the native tribes, mainly the Huron or the Wendat and the Iroquois. And this was exacerbated with the arrival of weapons and also with the demand for more furs. So these tribes started to encroach more and more on each other's territory. The Dutch arrived, as did the British particularly, and that also made it complicated. The British sided with the Iroquois and the French with the Huron. And each were trying to outdo the other. So as I mentioned, the demand for furs spread increasingly westward as the culling of the beavers continued in the east. They were looking for new territory, new resources. This made a longer voyage, a more dangerous voyage, and more conflict along the way, passing through other tribes. Arriving with the traders were the Jesuits. They were there on the mission to convert the indigenous people to their brand of religion and their all-powerful God. And this was a major division inside of families, native families, and inside of native villages and tribes. With the traders and the missionaries also came diseases that the indigenous people had no immunity to. Around Georgian Bay, it hit here around 1636, and it lasted for 4 years until 1639. 3 waves of pandemics came through. The worst was the smallpox, the last one. And at the end, somewhere between 50 and 75% of the indigenous people lost their lives. Huge conglomerates a little later on entered the picture. This is mainly the Hudson Bay Company and its rivals, notably the Northwest Company. And they really wanted to monopolize the whole fur trade and manipulate each other. It was really a mercantile competition that went violent. It's called the Pemmican Wars, and that warring lasted for about 50 years on all the trails and portages and so forth. Both companies began to substitute manufactured goods for alcohol as a trade item, well aware of the addictive nature of alcohol on the indigenous people. This was much more profitable for the companies to do this, easier to transport. They would get rum and whiskey from the Caribbean, high concentrations, 130 proof, and then it would be somewhat diluted when they got the big barrels on back into native territory. It's estimated that when the hunt for furs ended, or let's say the fur trade peaked and was over, there were about 100,000 beavers left in Canada. That's a lot, but it started at many millions. They were wiped out of the United States totally. After contact, the indigenous women, if they survived the pandemics and the alcoholism, their status in Native culture dropped considerably. The influence of European standards and gender roles in Europe and the arrival of the Jesuits and how they viewed gender roles contributed to that. The last thing I'll mention is, whoops. Oh, that's the alcohol. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the last thing I'll mention is the land itself. This was, this was a wild land. Extreme climates, extreme terrain. Nobody, whether you're European or native, you could be assured during winter that starvation wouldn't take hold. So I don't want to sound like it was some sort of cakewalk for the Europeans arriving in this land. The beaver gets the headlines, which I've contributed to, but every animal that had a pelt, a coat, or a hide was under attack and subject to be killed for trade. I've got a list I'm going to show you. Now, this is 1 year alone out of just Ontario, Upper Canada. In this 1 year, 1787, what was exported back to Europe. So this went on this was towards the height of it, but this went on, as I said, for about 250 years. And there were other animals too, lesser amounts, the lynx, caribou, wolverine, moose, and muskrat. So what do we make of this era? One could easily argue that what we gained was the country we love, Canada. One measure to claim ownership of land is usage. And so all those coureurs de bois and voyageurs, all those canoe routes, all those trading posts, all those portages, that contributed to usage, that contributed to Britain claiming ownership, and thus Canada existed. If you consider it from the indigenous tribes or the wild animals, the whole thing was utterly ruinous. That's quite bright. In my travels, I had the opportunity when I was, after my first year at the Ontario College of Art, I traveled for a year in the Middle East and in Europe. And I worked for a market gardener in Nantes, France. And we established it was a kind of a we established a close family interconnection. And over 60 years, Family members have been traveling and friends have been traveling back and forth between their family and their extended family and their friends and my family and so forth. In fact, there was a young 17-year-old girl from France just here a couple of weeks ago from that exchange. Anyway, these people, they were middle-aged, the market gardeners that I worked for. They came up and visited me when I was in Tobermory. The thing they wanted to see was a beaver. That was almost number one on their list. And I thought, well, yeah, Tobermory's bound to have beavers somewhere. So we go traipsing through some swamps and logs and stuff, and just hung out there until a beaver showed up. But you could see it through their eyes. You see this stump that's all chewed, and the tree has fallen, and there's big chips around. So this big rodent is chewing down trees and building houses with the wood and building dams. It was bizarre for them. And of course, they have a history. They think in France of this kind of fur trade, the beaver, Canada. It's all very romantic to them. This isn't the case for every country. Quite the opposite is true in Patagonia. I was there a number of times going to Antarctica. And the port there is Ushuaia, and that's where I'd get the boat to go. And I would walk around Ushuaia with a pack on my back, a little Canadian flag, and I would be booed and hissed at. I'm not an American. What are you doing? You don't do this to a Canadian. And it was explained to me later that after the war, after World War II, the officials in Patagonia wanted to create some employment for the people there. It's not good farmland. The land is like the boreal area of northern central Canada. So they had the idea, why don't we get beavers, put them on the land, and we can have a beaver industry, because Canada apparently made a lot of money with beavers. So Canada sent down 25 pairs of beavers to Patagonia. And the beavers got right to it. They started chopping down trees and building houses and having pups. And they were even more delighted when they realized that the Patagonians didn't know how to trap beavers, and there was very few predators there that were harming them. So it got to the point where there's now about 100 or 200,000 beavers in this little area of Patagonia. And so they've now got a complete eradication program to kill every single one of them. And they think it'll take about 15 years to do this and cost millions of dollars. So when they saw me on the street, it's not just the beaver they hate, it's the Canadian beaver they hate. So how could you dislike this little guy? So after 250 years, this European stampede to cull fur-bearing animals gradually waned, and as it did, interest pivoted to another resource, the land's endless sea of trees. And just like the early assessment of fur-bearing animals, the initial assessment was Canada was just so large and there was such an immense amount of virgin timber, it was literally inexhaustible. Of all the various species that were here, they sought out the white pine first. This became like the beaver pelt of the logging industry. It was the highest tree in eastern Canada. It could grow to 170 feet or more. Imagine 7 two-story buildings stacked on top of one another. Gives you an idea of what these giants look like. Now, most of these big pines at the beginning were earmarked for the British naval shipyards. And many of them were squared right in the bush, which you can see here, hewers using a big broad axe, 12 inches in length, sharpened like a chisel. And it would take 2 men a day to square a long length. And this made ocean voyages much safer instead of round logs, which would have a tendency to shift crossing the Atlantic. So this wave that went again from east to west reached Georgian Bay around 1850 in the southern part, and 20 years later reached the northern extent of Georgian Bay. Unlike the fur trade, it employed thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of men. Some were career bushmen, some were local men who were looking for jobs during the winter. And they would stay working in the forest, helping log, perhaps for 3 or 4 years until the culling was completed. Now, to obtain the right to take trees out of the forest, this was government land. This was auctioned off in the cities, probably Toronto and Montreal and other cities perhaps. And you would bid on the right, called a timber right, to take trees for a certain length of time, perhaps a couple of years. And these were big areas. Perhaps they could be 1,000 acres. They were different sizes. So the people that were bidding had never probably seen the area they were bidding on. They would send surveyors there prior to the bidding. These were called timber cruisers. So they would spend a couple of weeks surveying this timber limit and reporting back what kind of trees were there. Was there a river flowing there? Was it hilly? Was it flat? And so on. And then the person that was doing the bidding would know what he had to bid, how he could still make a profit, and so on. So that was done. This survey was done in the fall. Then, depending on the size of the limit, as I mentioned, it could be 1,000 men hired to work this limit. This was done in the wintertime. You had to bring in the men and the horses and other equipment. Trails had to be cut, rivers cleared, camps established, and stables erected, as well as a place for the men to sleep. It was done in the wintertime because you needed snow to be able to move these very heavy logs, either 1 or 2 at a time by a horse team or on a sleigh, like you see here. The men slept in these low-walled, what was called a camboose. It had a hole, a big hole, like a 4-by-4-foot hole in the roof, a fire in the middle on the ground, where it would provide heat, light, and it was where food was cooked. And the men would be on bunks all around the perimeter of the inside of this camboose. The whole thing in some parts reads like a military operation. Other times it reads like a prison chain gang. I mean, these guys were in a very remote area, expected to do brutally hard work for long hours in primitive conditions for 6 or 8 months at a time. Food was coarse, wages were low. About $16 a month is what they were paid in the late 1800s. Women and men were absent, and you had the added risk of being injured or killed. this risk of dying was the most severe in the spring breakup. This was when logs would be released into rivers. In the case of Georgian Bay, it might be the French River or the Spanish River or many of the other rivers. And these logs, each one weighing many tons, would be floated down, hopefully, and make it into the headwaters of Georgian Bay. But these logs would get jammed up, circuitous rivers, maybe shallows, maybe a big rock. But other logs would continue to come down and put tremendous pressure on this log jam. So men would be required to go out on these logs on the river and free the log jam. And the descriptions of it, when it's freed, it's like an explosion. Logs are flying into the air and stuff like that. So many, many men died doing this. But the people that controlled the figures on this didn't really want to make this public because they were always looking for new men to hire. It was open unemployment. That's the other thing. You could walk in to the boss. They called him the walking boss of this timber limit. Anybody could walk in and get a job. Usually they'd work for a day or two and leave. The work was so tough. But if you were tough enough, you could make a wage, which early on that was worth something because your other option was trying to farm in this really tough land. During this time, the Americans were eyeing Georgian Bay on the North Shore. They had leveled their trees in New England, and they'd done the same in the upper Michigan Peninsula, which had some of the best trees in North America, of virgin forests. So anyway, they came across to Georgian Bay, started cutting trees there and hauling them back. That's a long way to float a log from North Georgian Bay across and then across Lake Huron. Some of it would go to Detroit. Most of it would go to Saginaw, Michigan, which had probably the biggest sawmilling operation going in the world for a time. So these log booms were enormous. Some of them covered, I've got it written here, some of them covered 30 acres and held close to 100,000 logs. They were towed by a steam tug, maybe one or two steam tugs, traveling about 1 hour, 1 mile or 1 kilometer an hour. Anyway, it was slow. And of course, you know that you're on the water for a long time. You know what Georgian Bay or Lake Huron can go like. So that was quite a feat to get the logs across. So um, a tree laying in the forest isn't really worth much. Its value comes when you get it to a sawmill and you can turn a natural product into a man-made product. And it just takes one man with an axe to cut a tree down. You can do it in about an hour and a half. But it takes an army to get it to a sawmill, as you've been hearing. The actual milling operation, sawmilling operation, boomed around Georgian Bay. Just as an example, between 1870 and 1880, there were 13 major mills located along the North Shore from the French River to the Sioux. In Collingwood, the Hotchkiss mill churned out 150 board feet of wood per day. A board foot is 1 inch thick, 12 inches by 12 inches. So 1 foot, 1 foot, 1 inch thick. So they could calculate by the diameter of the log how many board feet um, uh, they had cut. Midland had more sawmills than any other town in Georgian Bay. The Playfair mill operated 24 hours a day and produced 50 million board feet annually. Wyerton had 8 mills. Owen Sound had 4 large mills. Penetanguishene had 6 mills. The Brentwood lumber mill had 300 employees. The Bruce Peninsula had 30 mills. Perry Sound was called the Sawdust City, produced 275 board feet of lumber each day. My little town of Big Bay, it even had a sawmill. The first sawmills were located near waterfalls, so using gravity. And then you had in the 1950s the steam engine powered by wood or coal. And of course, this upgraded the process dramatically. That introduced the circular saw, and it replaced the reciprocating saw that would just go up and down like that. And then later on, they introduced a double saw, one on top of the other, so they could then cut through bigger logs. The circular saws were about 4 or 5 feet across in diameter. So from the end of the 1850s until the end of the century, sawmill production roughly doubled every decade. With every innovation, the workplace became more and more dangerous. Especially vulnerable were young boys that the sawmills employed. After numerous accidents and deaths, the Ontario government was finally pressured to enact a law restricting sawmill workers to be at least 14 years old and prohibited them from working more than 60 hours a week. But even that was totally ignored by the sawmill operators, and a long list of terrible accidents to kids as young as 11 and 12 happened well into the 20th century. Fires. These sawmills were made of wood. The structure was made of wood. They cut wood. The energy source to provide lights that was made from kerosene or some sort of product such as that. The actual saw itself was fueled by wood or coal. Sawdust was everywhere. The whole thing was like a tinderbox waiting for a match. And indeed, these sawmills burnt down regularly. It became very common for a sawmill to burn down. When it did burn down, it not only endangered the livelihood of the sawmill workers, but it put the whole town, if it was a small town, it put that at risk because it was the biggest employer, usually, of a town when these sawmills were operating the way I've described. Forest fires were an even greater threat. As I described in the hewing, you're shaving off what you can see on that diagram of these chips that are falling on the floor. You're cutting off the top quarter of the tree. You're cutting off the branches. Toppling the tree is toppling other trees and other branches. All that is left. And year after year, that just keeps building up. So you have a dry summer. It doesn't take much for the whole thing to go up. And back then, it was very difficult to put out a forest fire without airplanes and without, trained firefighters ready to leap into action. Oh, yes. Got to show you that. It looks like 2 deer trying to stay out of the fire. Norman Robertson, you might have read his book, his 1906 book called The History of the County of Bruce. It describes what he claims is to be the first commercial fishing that began along the peninsula, on the west side of the peninsula. This was in 1831 when Captain Alex McGregor started fishing along the what's called the Fishing Islands off the lower western coast of the Saugeen or the Bruce Peninsula. I want to read an excerpt from this book. I think it's very telling. This was Alex McGregor's son worked with him when he was a young lad. His name was Murray. And when he grew up and got as an older man, he relayed verbatim to Robertson what it was like to fish with his dad on the fishing islands back then. And I think his account is indicative of what once swam out there. Captain McGregor's greatest difficulty in taking advantage of this source of wealth of nature's providing was to dispose of the immense quantities of fish that could be secured, as the numbers seemed unlimited. Sometime around 1834, when in Detroit, Captain McGregor entered into a satisfactory contract with an American company to catch and deliver in storehouses a quantity of fish of not less than 3,000 barrels annually. The company at the same time agreeing to take as many more as he could secure. The price to be paid was $1 per barrel, the company undertaking to clean, cure, and pack all fish so delivered. The fish caught were principally whitefish and herring, the catches of which were generally made by a seine net and were so large as to almost surpass belief. The net was quickly dropped. It would be a net would be taken out by a rowboat or something like that, and it would encircle an area where the fish were and brought back into shore, and then the two ends would be drawn in. The net was quickly dropped so to encircle the shoal. The hauling of the net to shore then began. When the fish commenced to feel the pressure from the narrowing net, the scene was one long to be remembered. There, in a small area, were entrapped thousands and thousands of fish, sufficient possibly to fill 500 to 1,000 barrels. At times, the catch was so large that the landing of the fish was extended over 3 days, so that none be lost through an inability of the cures to handle so many. At other times, when the supply of barrels or salt was running low, the net was opened to let a portion of the catch escape. In 1855, a railway line connected southern Georgian Bay to Toronto, and this gave a revolutionary jolt to the region's economy. They could now transport lumber more efficiently down into Toronto and southern Ontario, and they had a very effective means now to move perishable fish quickly to market. A Goderich newspaper published an article by a Georgian Bay yachtsman in 1877 under the title Roughing It, and it detailed the fishing activity that this yachtsman found when he entered Club Island Harbor. This is a painting I did in the early 70s of Club Island Harbor. I was in Tobermory between 69 and 82. Most summers, I would get dropped off on one of these outer islands for a week, take food and equipment and painting materials, maybe a canoe, and paint what was there, and then get picked up a week later by a fishing boat. This was the only building that was there standing at Club Island. It would have been a station. A fishing station, probably a number of buildings, men living there during the early spring into late fall. This building, I believe, would have been the ice house. It was built more sturdy than the other houses, typically. And the men would come in early spring with saws, saw out when there was still ice around in the harbor, and they would saw out ice maybe 1 foot wide, 1 foot deep, and about 4 feet long, and they would haul that into these ice houses, try to insulate it with sawdust or some other material, and that would preserve the fish to get it down to Meaford and then on to the city. So this is what the article said from this yachtsman, what he wrote. Here we found 4 Meaford fishermen carrying on trade with much success. During the season, their takes had been splendid, ranging from 5 to 15 tons per day. The fish caught were packed in ice and sent to Toronto by way of Meaford, where they arrived in the course of about 30 hours. So I'm just going to try and give you a sense of the scale of this. So I'm going to go through some numbers fairly quickly. Starting in 1870 and running through to the late 1940s, Georgian Bay yield was between 2 to 7 million pounds of fish per year. At its peak, around 1892, it's estimated that the catch was about 9 million pounds. The decline of Georgian Bay fish stocks had been well underway before I got there in 1969, of course. It probably started in the late 1940s, maybe a little earlier. By the 1950s, the lake trout, their most valuable fish stock, was completely wiped out. I don't think I've got the figures here, but the drop happened very, very rapidly. Within 5 years, it was like 4% or 5% of the catch that they were having 5 years previous. It was a little similar. In the book, I talk a little bit about my travels to Newfoundland and painting there and on the South Coast, and the same thing happened there with the cod. Other fish were being wiped out as well, but in a slower rate. This included the coho salmon, the herring, and the whitefish. Why they declined, of course, it was overfishing. Also, the sea lamprey was blamed, sports fishing, maybe pollution. Also, these sawmills were throwing on blankets and blankets of sawdust into the rivers, into the bays, all around these sawmills around Georgian Bay. This was clogging some of the rivers, which would have impacted fish spawning. Another indication of what was once here is told with the amount of fish nets. In 1889, there were 3,200 kilometers of nets that crisscrossed the waters of Lake Huron and Georgian Bay on the Canadian side. 4 years later, it was 12,000 kilometers of nets. That's the equivalent of stretching nets from Halifax to Vancouver and back again. That's Tobermory. You can see the drying the nets. They were using cotton nets back then. This would have been taken in the 1950s, I believe. They had to dry the cotton nets after lifting. In other words, they would rot. Later, they turned to nylon, of course. In 1880, Georgian Bay fishermen were recording more whitefish and lake trout being caught than any of the other Great Lakes. A royal commission in 1908 stated that the fishing grounds of Georgian Bay were the most valuable freshwater fishing grounds in the world. Now, when I arrived in Tobermory in 69, it was obvious to many of the local people that to contemplate their future, one had to just look at the steep decline of commercial fishing and the rapid ascent of tourism. So many of the fishermen were converting their net sheds to make things to sell to tourists. These could be knives or little neckties or little tables and so forth. Other fishermen were using their boats to ferry people to Flower Pot Island or to take them out to fish, sports fish, or to hunt or whatever. Still, there was a dedicated group of fishermen still willing to go searching for fish. One of these fishermen was Sid Lee. Uh, Sid had a large net shed at the southern end of Little Tub Harbor. It's still there. I think it's probably a restaurant now. He had an old dog, that's Pluto there, and an old truck, lived in a one-room shack, had no water. He had a big fishing tug, though, from the days when him and his brothers were the Lee Brothers Fishery, big-time operators back in the 40s and the 50s. The boat was called the Anzac. I had a magnetic draw to Sid. For me, listening to him, seeing him, watching him, it was like opening the door to the past, seeing life through his actions and his eyes from the bygone time of when there were fish. And Sid, you can maybe see it in this picture. I mean, he could have been cast he could have been cast by Spielberg to play that shark hunter in Jaws. And he wouldn't have had to act at all. I describe him as being rough as tree bark. And any rate, I mention him because on that, in June, I just moved up to Tobermory. Didn't know anything about anything. This was just fantastic. Left Toronto, started this Circle Arts Gallery with some other artists. And so Sid came into the gallery and said to me, would you like to go out with me for the weekend on the fish tug? He had some divers that wanted to charter the boat to go diving on a wreck. I said, sure. So Saturday morning, we took off, went to Cove Island. The divers on board dove on the shallow wreck off of Cove Island. And from there, we proceeded on this slow-moving tug to go north, passing over numerous wrecks where Sid did not stop. And I mean, there was some grumbling among the divers. First of all, none of these dive clubs go out to deserted islands for the weekend. They go and dive, and then they come back to their hotel and drink. So the idea of Sid taking these guys out and not coming back till the next day, this was strange. And they're all thinking, where the hell are we going to sleep? So we proceeded up, as I indicated on that map, to Fitzwilliam Island, and Sid wanted to go to the northern point, Rattlesnake Harbor. And so I'm going to read you just an excerpt of what I wrote, what I saw that day. That has impacted me more than anything else of my time in Tobermory. It was late afternoon by the time we approached the harbor entrance. The tug's throttle was cut way back as Sid's focus and demeanor quickly changed, like a hound catching a wild scent. As the tug slipped into the protection of the outer harbor, the engine slowed even more. From the wheelhouse, Sid barked out to me on the lower deck. Keep an eye out for them deadheads. Deadheads? I knew he wasn't talking about the followers of the Grateful Dead, but what the hell was he talking about? Over the years, this was just one of many of Sid's directives issued to me that I didn't really understand. In these instances, I mostly pretended I did. Anyway, I soon got my answer. A submerged old log came sliding into view, positioned on a 45-degree angle. One end just below the surface, the other anchored to the bottom. And it wasn't the only one. There were lots of them. They looked like a defensive device to wreak havoc on invading Athenian warships. From the front opening of the Anzac, I tried to concentrate on spotting other deadheads up ahead, but I was distracted. My eyes kept being diverted upwards to what lay across the water. At the outer end of the hook, silhouetted against the atmospheric haze of a late day sky were the remains of buildings, silent and still. Not like a ghost town, but a ghost town. For Christ's sakes, keep your goddamn eyes looking for them deadheads. They're everywhere here. Sorry, he said. Sid left the wheelhouse and came down to the deck as the Anzac coasted with the engine on idle. From the front opening, he leaned out over the gunwales, checking and looking for a safe route to shore. In doing so, my uselessness as his first mate was clearly conveyed and received. I really did try to comply with Sid's directive, wanting to be a reliable sort, someone he could count on. But the artist in me was held captive as my mind was trying to process the harbor's subject matter. What the hell is this place? Wow. And it's really called Rattlesnake Harbor. Of course, what I saw that day at Rattlesnake Harbor in 1969 were the remains or the artifacts of a gold rush of another kind, the last of the 3 gold rushes on Georgian Bay, namely the fish. This was, of course, as I mentioned, was the old stomping ground for the Lee brothers. Sid didn't give a shit about these divers on board. He was going, that's really why he took them. Why he took me on it, I don't exactly know. But I treasure that couple of days I spent with them. But I won't go on from that. Apart to say that I ended up fishing with Sid, not on the Anzac. I was his only crew member. We fished on a little punt. Suffice to say, it wasn't pretty. What I describe here this evening is sort of the overt exploitation of 3 natural resources. I'm not intending to make this specific to Georgian Bay, an area, or to the people here of Georgian Bay. I think in the last part of the book, where it's titled Beyond the Bay, where I traveled in other places in the world, I've seen the same thing, either happening or had happened. And I think really it's, well, you could talk about why we do this. But one of the problems, the first problem for me is an open resource meeting the private enterprise system. But I'll leave that with you. Maybe we could have the lights back on if they're handy. Yeah. Does anybody have any thoughts or? Yes.
Alan, fascinating history lesson. But one thing that I found missing from your presentation is the role and interconnections with the indigenous population. We know that the fishing industry was huge with them, and there were grievous things done to their industry. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, I do that in the book. I mean, it's just I've got 45 minutes to cover 400 years. So, and all these different topics. So, and I wanted to tell a few personal stories in that. So, yeah, there's all kinds of things I've left out that I do talk about in the book. It's interesting, though. I'll just tell you this. I can't tell you this confidentially, but I'll tell you it anyway. I have and this is the 4th book I've done. I've used a professional, substantive editor in Toronto. She's very good. She's substantively edited everybody, Margaret Atwood on down. And anyway, when I sent her the manuscript, she was I was so surprised. She was extremely leery about me even mentioning Native people. This is like, you're a white man. You don't have any right to talk about this. She didn't say it that way, but that's the underlying thing. And this surprised me because one of the things that an artist does is, say what they think. I have no power. Nobody follows me. I say what I want because that's the role of an artist in society. And here I found, okay, I'm being muffled. Now, she didn't have any control over me. She wasn't representing a publisher. She was just advising me, and I appreciated it because I got the sense of how sensitive this was. I thought about it for a bit, and then I went ahead and said what I wanted to say. I just felt anything else is not fair to me or to the people that read me. And I have a great deal of sympathy for the Native people. I don't think I said anything that was, but no, just the fact that I'm a old white guy, that was the case. That doesn't really answer your question, but I wanted to mention that it was very, very, it took me a couple of weeks to get over that and just mull it over what I was going to do with this manuscript. Yeah.
Where all that board was going to market for 9 million pounds of fish in 1 year being shipped south. Like, was that all for human consumption? Was it for fertilizer? Like, what were some of the end uses of that mass?
Well, it was.
For folks on Zoom.
Oh, you're absolutely. Thank you for that. Yeah. The question was, where did all this fish end up? And, I just assume it was consumed, with people. I can't, I don't know what else. I mean, it was cheap, right? It wasn't expensive. I mean, the distributor was paying $1 for a big barrel of fish. Yeah. Anything else? Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. Just been a pleasure to share this with a group that's I respect so much. So thanks very much.
Yeah. So I'm just going to thank Alan on our behalf. Alan's just a great guy to have in our community. We're so lucky. He's a very special person. He's a world adventurer, fantastic photographer, great artist. His artwork's better than photography, I think, and playwright, and kind of a neighbor up in Old Keppel Township too. But anyways, I learned a lot. You can tell he really does his homework on anything he does. He's a perfectionist, and this is going to be a great book. So thanks a lot for doing this. Georgian Bay is close to our heart. It's just in our backyard. In between Georgian Bay and the Niagara Escarpment, we've got two of the nicest, beautiful things in the whole province, and we're so lucky to be here to enjoy them. And this is going to provide even more information to appreciate what we do have today. So thanks very much, Alan.